The morning my son-in-law flew to Seattle for his conference, my daughter called me from the kitchen and said, "Dad, I think I need to tell you something." She was standing at the counter with a mug of coffee she hadn't touched, and her hands were shaking. I didn't know it then, but everything I thought I understood about the last 4 years was about to come apart. My name is not important. What's important is that I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a landscaping company from a single pickup truck and a borrowed leaf blower into something that employed 42 people across 3 counties in central Ohio, and I made the mistake that a lot of fathers make. I trusted the wrong person with everything I'd worked for because I loved my daughter and I wanted to believe that the man she loved deserved that trust too. His name was Donovan. She met him at a work event in Columbus, a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital, where she worked as a patient coordinator. He was charming in the way that some men are charming, easily, effortlessly, like breathing. He had a firm handshake and remembered your name and always looked you in the eye when he talked. My wife, before she passed, used to say that she got a strange feeling from him. I told her she was being protective. I told her she'd warm up to him. She never got the chance. She died 18 months after we met Donovan, a stroke, fast and without warning, the way strokes sometimes are. And I think that's when things really started to unravel. Not all at once, but slowly, the way a rope frays when it keeps rubbing against a sharp edge. Grief does something to your judgment. I don't say that as an excuse. I say it as a fact. When you lose your partner of 34 years, when the person who knew every version of you is suddenly gone, you lean on whoever is left. I leaned on my daughter, and my daughter leaned on Donovan, and somewhere in all of that leaning, I stopped paying attention to certain things. Donovan was an accountant, a CPA with his own small practice in Westerville. That sounds unremarkable until you understand that about 8 months after my wife died, when I was still going through the motions of running the business but not really seeing anything clearly, I let him start helping me with the company's finances. "Just to ease the load, Dad," my daughter said. "He's good at this. Let him help." So I let him help. He came in twice a month, sat with my bookkeeper, went through the accounts. I gave him access to the business bank accounts because it was easier. I added him to the company's financial portal because he asked and I trusted him. He started filing our quarterly taxes. He started handling our vendor payments. One by one, slowly, over about 2 years, he worked his way into the center of my company's financial operations, and I let it happen because I was grieving and tired and I thought he was family. I was wrong about all 3 of those things. My daughter's name is Reese. She's 31. She has her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness, and she is the reason I found out before it was too late. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started with a water heater. In October, about 4 months before the morning I'm describing now, I noticed that the payment to our main irrigation supplier, a company called Harmon Brothers out of Zanesville that we'd worked with for 11 years, hadn't cleared. The payment was always automatic, always on time, because that supplier relationship was the backbone of half our commercial contracts. I called Harmon Brothers, and they confirmed they hadn't received anything in 60 days. I thought it was a banking error. I called the bank. The payments had gone out. Just not to Harmon Brothers. They'd gone to an account I didn't recognize. I'm not a forensic accountant. I'm a man who built a business with his hands and hired people smarter than him to handle the parts he didn't understand. But I know when a number doesn't belong in a column, and I know what embezzlement looks like when the bank lays it out for you on a printed statement. The money was going to an LLC called Greenfield Financial Consulting. I'd never heard of it. I'd never signed anything with it. But my signature was apparently on the contract, authorizing the payments. I didn't say anything. I know that sounds strange. Most people would immediately confront. Most people would walk into that kitchen and demand answers. But I thought about my wife, about what she used to say when she suspected something. She'd say, "Collect all your rocks before you start throwing them." She meant, know what you have before you use it. Don't tip your hand early. Don't let the other person know you're watching. So I collected rocks. I called my attorney, A man named Patterson who'd handled my business incorporation 20 years ago and was still sharp as anyone I'd met. I told him what I'd found. He referred me to a forensic accounting firm in Columbus. I paid them out of a personal account. Donovan didn't have access to a savings account at a credit union I'd opened years before in a different county, the kind of thing you forget you have until you need it desperately. I told them to go quiet. No emails to my business address, no calls to my office, everything through a new cell phone I bought with cash at a Walmart in Marysville. I also called my bookkeeper, a woman named Faye, who'd been with me for 16 years and was as loyal as anyone who ever worked for me. I called her on a Saturday morning from a grocery store parking lot and told her what I'd found. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I thought something was off 2 years ago, but Donovan told me the accounts had been restructured and I shouldn't worry about it." 2 years. He'd been doing this for at least 2 years. The forensic accountants came back to me 6 weeks later with a report that I've since read so many times the paper is soft at the folds. The short version is this. Over approximately 26 months, Donovan had redirected $341,000 from my company's vendor payment accounts to Greenfield Financial Consulting LLC, which he had created himself using a registered agent in Delaware. He had forged my signature on the authorization documents. He had used his access to my financial portal to reclassify the outgoing payments as legitimate business expenses so they wouldn't appear unusual in a routine review. He'd been careful and methodical and patient, and if I hadn't noticed the Harmon brothers' discrepancy by accident, I might never have caught it at all. $341,000. That's what my wife and I spent our 20s building. That's what my employees depended on. That's what I'd handed over to a man with a firm handshake and a CPA license. Here is the thing about that number that I keep coming back to. He could have just asked. I know that sounds naive, but I would have helped him. I would have helped him because he was my daughter's husband and I'm not a person who turns family away. He didn't need to steal from me. He chose to. The hardest part wasn't the money. The hardest part was that I didn't know how much my daughter knew. I want to be honest about that because I spent 3 weeks lying awake at 2 in the morning turning it over and over. I did not know if Reese was part of this. I did not know if the daughter who had her mother's eyes had been sitting across from me at Thanksgiving and Christmas knowing what her husband was doing to me. I didn't know, and I couldn't ask, because if she was involved and I tipped her off, it was over. The money would disappear, and Donovan would be on a plane somewhere. My attorney walked me through the timeline. We were preparing to turn everything over to the county prosecutor's office and the Ohio Division of Financial Institutions. We were almost ready. Patterson told me the ideal scenario was to execute everything while Donovan was in one place, and we had all the documentation in order. When Donovan's conference in Seattle came up, a 4-day trip, Patterson said that was our window. Not to move on the legal side, not quite yet, but to talk to Reese first privately, without Donovan in the house. That was the plan. And that is why, when Donovan boarded his flight on a Tuesday morning, I drove to their house in Gahanna with a folder in my passenger seat and a stomach full of cold dread. I didn't have to say much. I set the folder on the kitchen table and Reese sat down and I told her I needed her to look at something. I watched her face while she read. I watched her go pale. I watched her hands start to shake. And I knew before she looked up, before she said a single word, that she didn't know. "Dad," she said, and then she just stopped. "I know," I said. "How long have you known?" "Since October." She put her face in her hands. She sat like that for a long time. I didn't say anything. There's a version of this moment where I felt relief, and there was relief, somewhere underneath everything else. But mostly I felt grief again, the same grief that had made me careless enough to let this happen in the first place, because I was watching my daughter absorb a betrayal that went beyond anything either of us had the vocabulary for. When she lifted her head, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. She said, "I need to tell you something too." I waited. "Last month," she said, "I found a second phone in his gym bag. I didn't say anything to you because I didn't know what it meant. But I took pictures of the texts on it." She got up and went into the bedroom, came back with her own phone, and she handed it to me. The texts were between Donovan and a woman whose contact name was saved as L. They weren't financial, they weren't business, they were the other thing, the oldest other thing, the thing that told me Donovan hadn't just been stealing from me. He'd been living an entirely separate life while my daughter sat across from him at dinner every night and tried to make their marriage work. I'm 63 years old, I have seen a lot, but sitting in that kitchen with my daughter looking at those messages, I felt something harden in me that I don't think has softened since. I called Patterson from the driveway. "We have additional material," I said. "What kind?" he asked. "The personal kind. The kind that affects the divorce filing." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That changes the picture." It did. In Ohio, while marriage is no fault for divorce purposes, documentation of marital misconduct can be relevant in asset division proceedings. Patterson connected Reese with a family law attorney named Whitmore in his firm, a woman who was calm and direct and exactly what Reese needed in that moment. Meanwhile, the financial case continued moving forward. Here's where it gets complicated in the way real life always does, which is to say messier than any story makes it sound. Donovan came home from Seattle on a Friday evening. He did not know that Reese had spent 4 days transferring her personal financial accounts out of their joint access, that she had met with a divorce attorney, or that my attorney had been in contact with the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office, and the matter had been formally referred for investigation. He did not know that on the Thursday before he landed, 2 investigators from the Ohio Division of Financial Institutions had visited my office and reviewed the forensic accounting report. He walked in the front door of his house with a rolling suitcase and said, "I'm starving. Is there anything to eat?" And Reese said, "I need you to sit down." She told me later that his face went through 4 or 5 different expressions in the space of about 2 seconds, confusion, then something she called calculation, then a kind of forced calm that was worse than the other 2. He said, "What's going on?" She put my forensic accounting report on the coffee table. He didn't pick it up. He just looked at it. "I found the phone," she said, "and Dad knows about the money." What he said next told me everything I needed to know about who Donovan really was, underneath the handshakes and the eye contact and the charm. He said, "How much does he know?" Not "I'm sorry," not "let me explain," not even "that's not what it looks like." How much does he know? Reese stood up and said, "Everything. He knows everything, and so do the investigators." There was a moment, she told me, where she genuinely wasn't sure what he would do. But he didn't do anything dramatic. He sat on that couch for a long time without speaking, and then he asked if he could call his own attorney, and she said yes, and she went into the bedroom and locked the door and called me. I was already in my car, 15 minutes away. I want to be precise about the legal outcome because I know it matters, and because I've watched enough people in difficult situations get vague about the facts, and I don't want to do that. The criminal case moved forward through the Franklin County system over the following 8 months. Donovan's attorney attempted to negotiate, argued the access had been granted voluntarily, tried several angles that Patterson had anticipated and prepared for. In the end, Donovan pleaded guilty to 1 count of theft by deception and 1 count of forgery, both felonies under Ohio law. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation, ordered to pay full restitution of $341,000, and had his CPA license suspended pending review by the Ohio Accountancy Board. Under Ohio's professional licensing statutes, a felony conviction in matters directly related to your license practice is grounds for permanent revocation. His license was revoked 8 months after the conviction. Restitution is being paid on a structured schedule. Faye helped me set up a separate account to track the incoming payments. I review it every month. The divorce was finalized 7 months after Donovan moved out. Reese got the house because it had been purchased partly with her inheritance from her mother, which her attorney documented thoroughly. Donovan got the debt. Here's what I want to tell you about the part of this that doesn't fit in a legal summary. My daughter didn't sleep well for about 6 months. She would call me sometimes at 11 o'clock at night Not because she had anything specific to say, just to hear another voice. I drove over there more times than I can count. Sometimes just to sit in her kitchen and drink bad coffee and watch TV I wasn't paying attention to. It wasn't dramatic. It was just the slow, unglamorous work of getting through something. She's doing better now. She started seeing a therapist in the spring, which I think was one of the smartest things she's done. She got a new position at the hospital, more responsibility, better pay. She adopted a dog, a big, ridiculous golden retriever named Biscuit, who destroys everything he touches and has apparently been extremely good for her mental health. I still think about what would have happened if she hadn't found that phone, or if Harmon Brothers hadn't noticed the overdue payment and called me instead of just waiting. Or if Faye had never said anything about her own suspicions 2 years ago. The whole thing balances on a series of small moments, any one of which could have gone a different way. What I know is this: I spent a lot of the last 4 years making myself smaller to accommodate Donovan, softening my own instincts out of some idea that being a good father-in-law meant not making waves. My wife trusted her instincts. She got a strange feeling and she said so. I told her to wait and warm up and give it time. I should have listened. The company is in good shape. We brought on 3 new commercial contracts in the spring, and we're hiring 2 more crew leads before the summer season. Faye finally let me give her the raise she's been turning down for 6 years. The Harmon Brothers account is current and has been for 8 months, and Mike Harmon sent me a card at Christmas that said, simply, "Glad you're still around." I keep it on my desk. There's a moment I keep coming back to. It was a few weeks after everything came out, before the legal proceedings had really started, and Reese and I were sitting on my back porch in November cold, because neither of us felt like being inside. She had her mother's old cardigan on, the green one with the frayed cuffs, and she was holding her coffee with both hands the way her mother used to. We weren't talking about Donovan. We were talking about nothing in particular, the way you do when you're exhausted and there's nothing left to say, and you're just glad to be near someone who knows the whole story. She said, "Do you think Mum knew? Like really knew?" I thought about it. "Yeah," I said, "I think she knew." Reese nodded slowly. "I'm sorry I didn't listen to her sooner." "Don't be," I said. "You were in love. That's not a character flaw." She leaned her head on my shoulder the way she used to do when she was little, before the world got complicated, and we sat out there until the coffee was cold and the sun had gone all the way down, and I thought, this is what's left after everything else. This is what they couldn't take. I'm not a man who believes in tying things up neatly. Life doesn't work that way, and anyone who tells you otherwise is either selling something or hasn't lived long enough. But I will tell you that 63 feels different than I expected. I thought it would feel like an ending. Instead, it feels like the first time in years that I can see clearly, that I know exactly what I'm protecting and why, and that I'm not going to hand it to the wrong person again, not without collecting all my rocks first.